these next few videos, we're going to have videos showing actual village. Here we have a Fort Ancient village. It's important when you see all the mounds and everything else to see how these people actually lived. Because the ceremonial complexes would have had villages around them where the ancient. Now in this instance, Fort Ancient, you can see their activities here. The Fort Ancient ceremonial complex, about 1200 to 1500 AD, was never a homogeneous monolithic civilization, but was probably comprised of loosely related tribal bands scattered over the present-day areas of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky. The largest Fort Ancient village site is Madisonville, Ohio. There is no evidence, however, that Madisonville or any of the other sites operated as the major Fort Ancient center of influence. The Fort Ancient civilization is viewed as a distinct development during the late Woodland period. Now you can see the village here. Some of the activities, the importance of corn is predominant in this village. This is the inside of a hut. Seeing their distinctive pottery, the markings on there. Now this is how archaeologists date a lot of these pots, because certain civilizations have distinct markings on the pottery. You see them bringing in the deer. The deer were the primary meat source of these people, as well as fish and turkey. Here we see women engaged in corn agriculture. That would have been their primary job in this village. The agriculture was run by the women. This Fort Ancient complex is broken into three time areas: early, middle, and late. The early phase is prone to local influences, while the late Fort Ancient phase is more complex and shows an abundance of outside influences coming from all cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. Here's a Fort Ancient shaman. As the earlier Indian civilizations were influenced by other distinct and distant cultures, so were the Fort Ancient people, as indicated by the diversity of the village sites. It's also certain that the Fort Ancient people passed on their knowledge and culture to other peoples and were probably an important link in passing on agriculture and ceremonies associated with it to other points. Here you see some combs here. Shell, an important status symbol. These all these artifacts here were found at this site here. This site here is right outside Dayton, Ohio. Right there is a dog. Now they just thought that dog was refuse, but later on they found evidence that that dog here was sacrificed as some part of some ceremony, so it was a sacred animal. Once again, what appears to be one way is often revised as they get more evidence. This is the importance of investigating these sites. A Fort Ancient village would have been bustling with activity. At the height of the Fort Ancient village would have been the large council house where the chiefs resided and performed ceremonies important to the vitality of the tribe. In the tombs of these chiefs, high status items are found, but very seldom any weapons. In Fort Ancient sites in general, there is no evidence of any large-scale violence. Few large mass graves, and most of the villages seem to have been constructed in a non-defensive position. As the Fort Ancient civilization progressed, the houses and villages became larger. Now here is the actual village itself. This is outside. This is actually on the site. Now this site was at one time was going to be abandoned or turned into a waste dump by modern civilization, but they saved this. Here we have a tune here. That's from a simple bone flute there. I put some people in here to provide some scale to it and show you. There's a solar calendar right there. The inside of the hut. Now they have found evidence of these bone whistles. They only had like 4 note holes in them, an opening at each end. They would have had very simple tunes, such as the type played in the background. Note the hole in the roof to let the smoke out. This is just one type of village we'll be showing here. We'll show another type later on, just to give you an idea of what village life would have been like. And the average age of these people at the time of death was around 38 years old. It is believed that the Fort Ancient people adopted the green corn ceremony, which was prevalent in the Mississippian culture and other Western Indian nations. Archaeologists have found refuse pits where corn was ceremonially burned and buried, which is still practiced today by American Indians. In addition to agriculture, the Fort Ancient people derived meat protein from the turkey, waterfowl, fish, and the sacred cattle of the Shawnee, the white-tailed deer. There's a corn pounder there. There was a dugout there, type boat that used. These would have been right along major riverways. There's a platform there. They believe they may have stood there, like chase away animals after the corn. Once again, an overview of the village here. Now this is inside the museum, showing the objects that were removed, most of these from graves. You can see how dependent they were on, like deer bones and shells. Those are for corn agriculture there. While new innovations no doubt added to the enhancement of Fort Ancient life, these new additions also had a downside as well. People in the early Fort Ancient tradition enjoyed better dental health than the later Fort Ancient people. Corn agriculture wreaked havoc on the teeth of later Fort Ancient people, and later Fort Ancient health is generally seen as worse due to problems associated with population density. Evidence of contact with European traders is evidence at some of the later sites, particularly at the Middle Fort Ancient site. At the Buffalo site in West Virginia, Neal's site in Parkersburg, there are a few European items, but some later sites have an abundance of European goods. Once again, we're showing the daily life here. Daily activities. This is the type of, there you have the storage of corn, pottery making pits there, fire pits for firing kilns, pottery, maybe a sweat lodge there. Once again, the arrow is the important thing to come in. These arrowheads during the Fort Ancient tradition, the bow and arrow came in, may have come in a little earlier, around 1000. They believe the bow and arrow came in. Here we have a guard. He's sitting on a tower wall. Once again, Fort Ancient weren't militaristic, but they did have areas around there, and they would have probably had some guards posted here and there during periods. Women at their agricultural work. Some of the villages of the Fort Ancient peoples were abandoned as they become buffalo hunters. Now, they found a number of buffalo bones at the Madisonville site, but they don't find them at other sites. This theory says that the Fort Ancient people moved into and out of traditional Fort Ancient lands chasing these buffalo. Not all of the Fort Ancient people chased the buffalo, however. A large number would have remained in their traditional territory. Now, that's a shaman's pipe there, or symbol there. They found that in the grave of a important shaman. You can see the sweat lodge there. That, once again, these are important ceremonial houses. Now, links to the Fort Ancient people and the tribes of the historic area, like the Shawnee and Cherokee, are almost definite, and it is easy to see a close parallel between these tribes and the Fort Ancient tradition, particularly in regard to like pipe smoking, shamanic ceremonialism, and sacred symbology. So again, the pipes, they found large caches of pipes in a lot of these graves, indicating how important tobacco smoking was to these people. Once again, the Fort Ancient sites, you see it was a loosely confederated, and they were in competition with other complexes at the same time. You can see the Whittlesley and the Monongahela complex. They're all from the same period. Once again, all these complexes were getting corn agriculture. You can see the Mississippian, the Fort Ancient, they were being surrounded by these other cultures. They picked up influences from all these cultures in their trade. Once we have a post there, and they linked these the findings in the men's lodge to the Delaware and Shawnee Big House, as you can see from this. These would have been important ceremonial houses. There you see two dogs ritually buried. Now, once again, as I said earlier, they thought these dogs were just refuse or something had been found, and then they found some sacred amulets and some other things indicating that they had been buried as part of some ceremony. In addition, there have been pieces of corn found that were ceremonially burned in pits as part of like a green corn ceremony, which is an important ceremony in the Cherokee present day. So there we have links there to this ceremony, and the green corn was also important in Iroquois as the cultures, expanded out, and all these nations adopted corn agriculture and more intensive type agricultures. Showing you the beads. These would have been high status items here, worn by important dignitaries stuff. Now, this is a skull that they found here, and this is like a reconstruction of what this person looked like. You can see how this is using modern forensics here, and there's an artist's rendition of what the shaman must have looked like. Once again, he was buried with these feathers, and they do find pieces of cloth in these graves also that have been preserved by copper, by reacting with copper. It's a big house lodge there. There's the women there, once again engaged in the corn agriculture. You can see there it says they were stratified in this village here. They said not all the people seem to have been of equal importance, which indicates that this village here would have been probably one family in their clan, and the more high status individuals lived inside the village and would have had more access to the places around there. It's again that distinctive Fort Ancient pottery. Woodpeckers, different types of bone. They used all parts of the animal. So again, this pipe here is one of the most profound pipes that they found in the area. Now here they're showing the Fort Ancient dependence on the deer and how they used the deer literally for everything, just like the Plains Indians would use the buffalo. They made tools out of them. They made arrow points. They used the teeth for necklaces. Here we have other objects found in the graves. Notice the arrowheads seem to be smaller than some of, and because the bow and arrow you needed to make it lighter so the arrows would fly. Daily activity showing the fence there. So as you can see, that fence there would not really defensive so much as more like a territorial type marking. Here's a guard up on the tower there. Whether he's guarding or whether he's just looking out over there, not really certain. He's dressed in Fort Ancient costume. Now, Fort Ancient villages too, there are other artist renditions of them that some of them look slightly different from this, and some of them they almost use a longhouse. Now this is the waterway that would have been used by the Fort Ancient people, and this empties into the Great Miami River eventually. So All these villages are built on some type of floodplain in an ecological zone where there's like different types of trees. Now we have another type of village here that would have been around at the same time, the Fort Ancient village. Now this is representative of the Monongahela type culture, an Iroquoian type culture. This village here particularly was located on the Susquehanna River, but it's the same type village that they found up near Pittsburgh and even into Ohio. So this culture would have been around at the same time that the Fort Ancient culture. Notice the dependence on corn here. Here we have a woman pounding corn. Earlier in the Fort Ancient tape, we showed you how one of these looked like. That's for pounding corn. Here we have a man watching over the crops, keeping the predators and the birds and things off the crops. This role was usually given to like an older male, or female sometimes did this. Also might have doubled as like a sentry. Once again, corn, the woman's work. Corn is what brought about the great change in population densities and things like that during this time period. This would have been around the 1200s. Once again, you see now these villages here were heavily stockaded and fortified. So it's presumed that you can see there people manning the tops of those stockades. So these were defensive works here, as well as, you know, territorial type markings. Whereas if you see some of the Fort Ancient, now they don't look quite this formidable, but I was talking to one archaeologist and said that they very well may have been a lot more built up, the walls of the Fort Ancient villages, than what they appear to be. We have an older man instructing a young child. Youth here learning how to hunt. They're already learning their skills. Pottery making. You can see them grooving the lines on the pottery, and this is, as I said earlier in the Fort Ancient tape, this is how they identify a lot of these potteries, a lot of these cultures, because they had their own distinct markings on the pottery. Now here is fishing, showing how they use the fish traps in their canoes. Now the Monongahela culture, there is evidence, they have found evidence that they were in conflict with a lot of other tribes, and especially, well, like the Iroquois. When the Iroquois came in during like 1500s, when the fur trade was active, there was a lot of fighting over the furs, particularly in the northern areas where the furs were heavy, and there was competition between the Indian tribes to try to control the fur trade. Now the furs in the southern area were not that thick, so the competition between the furs in the southern part probably was not as ferocious as some of the competition in the northern areas was. And they have found graves where there's been in these cultures here, this Monongahela culture, well, the Iroquois, and where there have been evidence of battles. Here we have the inner shaman ceremony. It was completely dark in here. You can hardly see what's going on, but they're doing a ritual dance. Here we see some of the temporary shelters. Now, a lot of times these groups would split during certain times of the year, and family units would go out and have their own established territories on the river, and then they would meet together at certain times, come back, and this is where the ceremonial complexes come in, where these scattered groups come back for their ceremonies. Their corn, especially when corn came in, green corn, and here you have a night sky celebration. And the night sky was very important to these people, as well as the sun. The sun became more predominant for the planting and things like that, and the energy. And then the evening sky was where, you know, you received your dreams and messages, and you could also use that for a calendar. Here we had an abandoned village showing how they would burn their villages when they left and move on to a new site. This is where the competition came in a lot of times, intertribal competition for resources, hunting, fishing rights, things like that. Moving into this is prehistoric seen here, caribou hunting. This would have been in the Archaic period, showing how they lived there. And this here we have sunflowers. Now, growth of this is how man first learned how the American Indian especially learned how to domesticate plants. They would follow around like plants like sunflowers and things like that, just plant small amounts. And you know, they practiced what they call horticulture as compared to agriculture. When corn came in, then agriculture became big. Now these are petroglyphs here, and this was a common American Indian way of communicating. You see the symbols; all those symbols would have meant something to them. They've been different clans, messages to each other, possible road maps, messages from the gods. You name it, it probably was on here. Territorial markings. Seeing a birch bark canoe, the Indians became very adept at building these, particularly the northern tribes, and they used the dugout canoe as well. There's some kind of a message there. This could either be an Indian bragging about his hunting skills, or possibly wishing that the game would be more plentiful, or even some clan. Here you have, this is an actual petroglyph that there was a fish there that was pulled off one of the rocks. That's an actual one there. It was grooved in there. Here you see the winter hunt here. Winter was particularly a devastating time where a lot of tribes would scatter during the Archaic periods because the population density wasn't that high, and they could support it. Now here is definitely a Mississippian type. You see the influence of some of the Mississippian or even the southern, the cross there. Now, although this is a Monongahela type site, that cross there, representing the four corners of the earth, the four winds, whatever, was found at many sites. So again, fishing, and you can imagine the size of the salmon or trout that they pulled out of these rivers at one time, because the rivers were cooler. Burial here. The Monongahela people used different types of burials, just as the Fort Ancient did, and even the Hopewell, where depending on their status, you know, it would either have been like the higher status, sometimes cremation or log tombs or marble slabs, and for the less wealthy, sometimes they're just a simple bundle burial and giving grave goods. There we see the weeping widow there in the background, grieving over the loss of her husband. He said he died of old age at like 36. Once again, pipe smoking was extremely important to the Monongahela people, and Fort Ancient as well. They found these a lot of these pipes have status attached to them. It would only have been allowed to smoke by certain clans or certain family members. Some would have been communal pipes, as opposed to some would have been individual. Once again, you see there's so many similarities in this culture, even though this tribe is maybe thousands of miles from other tribes using the same type pipes. So there was a lot of commerce and a lot of interaction. Now here's a comb. These are combs. Notice they probably would have been worn in the hair, as well as, you know, used for combing. They made them into decorations. Such a reliance on ritual and status. Everything had to look, had to have its place in the spirit world. Now here you have a dugout canoe. This was actually found laying in a bog, and it was preserved. There you see Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, 1250 AD. That's definitely from the Fort Ancient period. It just shows you how they buried, or how they burrowed out this canoe by firing it and then chipping away. Here we have Susquehannock pottery. Notice the similarity between this and some of the other types, the Monongahela type and the Fort Ancient type. It has a distinctive rims to them a lot. That's what marks them as belonging to a specific culture. Although the lines are not as fine sometimes what they may appear to be, but they also tell, because of the way the clay has been tempered, where the Fort Ancient start to use shell. Other other tribes use limestone, things like that. That's how they figure out whose pottery it is. Although some of that even crossed over here. Just, once again, you see the burials. That one there is what they call flexed, where they have the... now we're getting into some of the animals that would have dominated the area. See these birds here now. It's really important because a lot of times when you get to these archaeological sites, you don't realize what type animals around here. The earth is alive. All these animals would have been known very well to these Indians and used in ceremonies. Their animal power. I was reading one book that said that the American Indian, there was the lines between animal and man, or God's. They were all seen as all God's creatures. The lines were not that fine. Here we have the type of raptors that would have been around in the Monongahela culture. A lot of these birds also would have been present and would have been known in the Fort Ancient culture, because like I said, this was all during the same period, and there probably would have been some type of interaction between this. Once again, the white-tailed deer, this animal here is found in more abundance. The remains of this animal and Turkey were their primary source of food, and also a lot of fish and mussels. So they weren't hurting for food or anything. There was plenty. It's just amazing the type of birds and the species around that were around now. A lot of these birds, you don't see them around anymore. Us today, we're not even aware that they were even around because they've been run off. Their habitats have been destroyed when they drain areas, wetlands primarily for farming and things like that. That forces certain species to move out, or even some species to die. Now here you see the fresh type of trout and other fish that would have been in the rivers, in the Ohio River and Allegheny River, and some of the tributaries coming down into like the Hocking and some of the other ones. Although you see more and more of it, it is coming back today. Especially they're stocking. They're trying to keep the water cleaner, but there's still, from what you hear biologists say, there's still a long, long way to go. The reason I'm presenting these animals here is because you couldn't actually present a videotape on the American Indian without giving some respect for the life and the animals and their brothers that they had, these animals. I'm going to play a little tune here from a bone whistle. It only has 4 notes, so bear with me. These are elk here. Elk were extinct in Ohio around the Fort Ancient culture around the 1850s. There were still some elk in Ohio when the Fort Ancient culture was around, but they were diminishing by then because they do find elk bones in the refuse heaps. White-tailed deer. The puma. Last one of these was killed in Ohio, I think, in 1842. The last mountain lion. They try to reintroduce these species nowadays, but unfortunately they get into trouble with farmers and their livestock and things, and they also sometimes will attack domestic pets. But the American Indians seem to exist side by side with these animals for thousands and thousands and thousands of years and seem to get along with them pretty well. So we probably have a lot to learn from the Indians about how to get along with these animals here. The buffalo was not plentiful at all in Ohio during the Fort Ancient culture, but there were some stands down in Kentucky. Woodchucks here. Once again, showing you the wetlands, and like a lot of the Ohio was 85% wetlands when the white man first got here. So that most of it was drained for like roads or for farming and things like that. Now here you have a mastodon. This is this skeleton here was found in Pennsylvania. This mastodon here, it's a real famous. It was found during construction of a road. Now here's an artist's rendition of some archaic. Now this was a couple, like maybe 10,000 years before the Fort Ancient people. So I'm just trying to keep this thing in perspective here so that you don't think that these elephants were around during Fort Ancient, because the mastodons and mammoths were extinct for about 10,000 years or even more by the time Fort Ancient culture was in. But it is an interesting and beautiful and well done piece of work here. So again, I'm going back to some other animals here, showing you the ducks. There's so many different types of ducks. I mean, you know, we see a lot of mallards nowadays, and some other, maybe a few types of teals, but there just literally was probably 50 to 60, maybe more different varieties of ducks. Some are extinct now, and some have just gone, you know, farther south, or you just don't see them much anymore. Because a lot of these animals, some of these animals do very well in dirty, brackish type water, polluted water. Other species just need, the water has to have a real high oxygen content and be the right temperature for them to survive. And over the years, from the population density and things like that, and the pollution, it has degraded some of the types of animals that can exist in these. The mice. There's a muskrat there. The spider was a real common, it used on amulets and things like that to the American Indian, especially you see a lot in the Mississippian and some in the Fort Ancient and Iroquoian. Like I said, these cultures just so overlap. They're basically, where they really overlap is in their identity toward nature, their oneness, a feeling of, you know, all the earth is one. That's the thing that most of these Indian cultures have in common, although they're different languages and things like that, but really their affinity for nature is just marks them as an Indian culture, their sacredness for life, all types, not just human. And they said when Indians hunt animals that they pray, and well, here you have snakes, and you know there was one Indian that said he had never been bitten by a snake, and he never killed one either. He never saw them as his enemy, you know, and he had certain charms and amulets that would keep snakes away from him, and he lived to a ripe old age. Once again, the woods here. Now all these cultures, we're talking about the Fort Ancient and the Monongahela, they are woodland cultures. They are reliant on all this, the wood for everything. They made their houses out of wood, burned wood in the fires, you know, canoes, you name it. They used wood for it. Now whether they practice any type of you know, forestry or anything like that, it's not really known, but with their respect for nature, they probably were aware when areas were overpopulated or too much timber was being taken out of certain areas. Here you have showing you some Monongahela type villages and their actual locations along. This is in the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania, over toward Lancaster County, toward Harrisburg. Ironically, in the same area, 3 Mile Islands, and where the disaster, the nuclear disaster was back in like '79. Once again, this is Susquehannock pottery here. Now that there is more like a Mexican type pottery there, showing the influence that they find in these villages. Well, like during the late Fort Ancient period, they find Indian pottery mixed with European trade goods. They find that a lot, and then they realize that they can date the site, you know, from a later period. Here you have the different villages and showing you, you know, the longhouse culture there. Now I'm going back to the village here. For one thing, I like this, the way this is laid out. It really gives you a feel for what this village must have been like. And these villages up and down the Susquehannock River, I think there was a major village, I guess, every 20 to 30 miles. And then there were just like little, like family units. Here you have, these are Iroquoian style masks, but once again, you see those masks, you see them type in Cherokee, you see them out west, everywhere. They're used in healing ceremonies and religious observances, things like that. It's actually believed spirit power exists in these masks. And some families, some Indian families even today will guard their masks like a Bible or something. Showing a ritualistic stick there. Notice the faces printed on there. What exactly this was used for, I'm not real sure. That shows an Indian signature. How they made treaties and things like that. They had their marks. And this one here is some mark of some Susquehannock chief. Now here they are being cheated of their land, probably, from the looks of things. These are actual signatures on the Penn Treaty, where there was it was called the Walking Purchase, where the Indians made a treaty with the Pennsylvania settlers to give them land where they could walk in a day, and the governor of Pennsylvania hired runners instead of how far a man could walk in a day. It was how many marathon runners could sprint in a day, and they ended up with a lot more land, and the Indians were flabbergasted at the way the white man worked. And there'd be even more in stock. Now here you see an old fort on the Pennsylvania frontier. Now this is Fort Loudon over outside Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Just shows this fort was built in the 1750s. And it marked the beginning of white settlement, you know, heading over the Appalachians. And these were used as like posts and supply posts. A lot of these weren't really government institutions. A lot of them were made by private companies with the sponsorship of the Pennsylvania government or the British government at that time, and they were kept as supplies or, you know, places to flee to in case of a declaration of war against the Indians, something like that. We see now in a very short period of time how the Fort Ancient culture just evolved, and, you know, with the advent of the Europeans, it just disappeared more or less into the historic period. A very rapid change with a lot of these settlers came diseases. And in closing here, we're going to take a look at the Fort Ancient exhibit down in the Charleston, West Virginia Museum. But once again, here we start out with mastodon hunting. Remember, this is probably 10,000 years before Fort Ancient. But now here's something fishing, showing the way they pull the net across the creek, little creeks like that, or runs. These are little dioramas here down in the State Museum. I think they're well done. See a Hopewellian type or Adena type burial. Once again, this would have been a couple hundred years, maybe even 1,000 years before the Fort Ancient. That was an Adena house back there. This showing the shaman there presiding over some type of ceremony. It looks like a burial, maybe a log tomb there in a charnel house. Yeah, that's a Hopewell charnel house there, ceremonial house. Now we're getting into the Fort Ancient era here. We're starting to see the dugout canoes here. And like a home there. It looks more like a Hopewell. Now here's the Fort Ancient section here showing them building the thatched roofs on there. This is like one section of the large village, showing the construction from the wood. Then the mud and the clay mixed together, make the walls. You see the agriculture patch there. This is just a small village, or just maybe a one family type unit, representative of a family type grouping. Here's a temporary hunting camp. Now these Indians, a lot of times when they would go out and see they have the bow and arrow, they would make hunting camps in other areas and loom literally hundreds of miles. And then a lot of times they would come in conflict with other tribes over the hunting areas. These are just artifacts taken from graves at some of these sites, Fort Ancient. You see the charred corn cribs, corn cobs, copper janglers, pipes, once again, some kind of beads there. Now this is the weeping eye motif. These were placed over the face of the corpses when they were buried, and that's how they got those. But that's a Mississippian symbol, the forked eye. Maybe have something to do with the feathered serpent cult or one of the other Indian cults. Bone scrapers. Those are made from deer bones. There you have ones from turkey. Bone flute, you can see that there. That's what they sound like. Very simple tunes, but once again, very satisfying to the American Indian.
Welcome to an introduction to Adina Hopewell shamanism. Adina Hopewell shamanism was for the most part based around contact with the powers of the universe and the cosmos, especially animal powers. Here we see remnants of wolf skulls that were used as animal masks, shamanic masks for ceremonies to contact the spirit of the animal. The wolf was one of the most powerful animals used by the ancient Adina Hopewell shamans. Wolf medicine was used in healing and to contact the powers of the spirits of the stars. Here you see various types of masks utilizing the wolf jaws. If you notice, the teeth have been sharpened. Here's another aspect of using the wolf jaw as a ceremonial artifact to connect with the animal powers. Also, dog was used in ceremonies. For dog was one of the first domesticated animals. Here we see examples of depictions of other animal powers on sacred objects used by the Adina and Hopewell shamans. Here we see a ceremony led by a bear shaman. The bear shamans and wolf shamans were healers. He utilized the energy of the earth, the powers of the cosmos for healing their clients. And here we see burial ceremonies taking place in an Adina village. Here we see an effigy showing the merging of the power of the human, the shaman, and the bear. Bear medicine men, both in ancient Adina shamanism and in modern American Indian shamanism, were very, very powerful healers. Here we see a dog pipe, various other effigy pipes. Many of these are from the Sipe Mound in southern Ohio. Sipe Mound is a large, rectangular, semi-pyramidal formation. These elaborate effigy pipes, which were used in ceremonial use of tobacco in shamanic trance ceremonies, are found in many different places. Here we see the earthworks as they originally would have looked at the Sipe Earthworks Complex. And here we see Fort Ancient. which was a leveled-off ridgetop or hilltop used as a ceremonial area by the ancients. And here we see the Great Hopewell Mound group, with the elaborate geometric earthworks used by the Hopewell people. And here again are effigy pipes used by the Adena Hopewell peoples, plus many other carvings of copper and mica, representing the powers of the universe, the animal spirit powers. The animal effigy pipes were used in meditation and trance ceremonies by the shaman who was smoking with them. They utilized sacred tobacco combined with other herbs such as coltsfoot and mullein. Each of the symbols that you see before you had specific meanings and uses within the Adena Hopewell shamanic cultures. The various symbols represented either animal powers or represented the powers, the elemental powers of the universe, such as earth, air, fire, water. Here we see a burial chamber with a shaman, the other medicine men, leading the burial ceremony, preparing the spirit of the deceased for passage over into the other side, into the other world. This is the famous Adena effigy pipe, found in central Ohio a number of years ago. If you look very closely, such as at the ear spools, the earrings, the waistband, these represent Mesoamerican influences from Mexico in the ancient Adena cultures. Here we see skulls from the Adena Hopewell mound builder period that show the deformation of the skulls, which is also a trait that may link them with the cultures of Central America. The deformation of the skulls was something that was practiced by Mayan cultures. Here we see one of the main hunting and self-defense weapons used by the Adena peoples, but also by the Mesoamericans, the atlatl, the throwing stick. Was used to project a spear to kill large game. Here we have inscribed and engraved stone tablets, something that is very peculiar and a part of the Adena Hopewell culture. Here we see the Hopewell Mound group, as well as various flint and bead artifacts found at the site. The shell beads show a vast trading network that covered most of eastern and southern North America at one point in time. And here we see the copper ear spools that you also saw a couple of minutes ago on the effigy pipe, which represent a possible connection with the cultures of the Maya and the Toltec peoples of Mexico. Here we see the conch shell, found throughout the mound builder cultures of North America. This has a spiritual symbology representing the power of the wind, but also the great teacher of the Americas, Quetzalcoatl. Here we see representations of flint, stone tools. Flint was a sacred rock used by the ancients. It represented the cosmic power of fire. Also found in many of these sites are obsidian spear points. And here we see engraved artifacts of copper. Different parts of the animals were also used to make medicine objects, amulets, and talismans, such as the bare teeth and claws. Here we see a large axe made of stone. The use of obsidian and flint again were sacred stones used by the ancients in their ceremonies to connect with the different vibrational powers of the earth. Many of the objects that you are seeing now, for instance, here are 3 boat stones made out of quartz crystal. These were used in divination ceremonies to connect with the earth energy. These objects that you're looking at had a sacred purpose, a spiritual purpose, in the shamanic spiritualism of the Adena Hopewell peoples. Here we see the famous Tremper pipes, effigy pipes, showing many different animal species. Each of these animals, whether four-legged, bird, fish, owl, represented a connection with the spiritual powers of the animal kingdom. For each one represented a totem animal in a vast spiritual system of Native American cosmology, astronomy, and astrology. Here we see a medicine man smoking an animal effigy pipe. The owner of a particular animal effigy pipe would have the effigy carved to represent his or her own personal animal totem, or the clan to which they were members of. The workmanship, the quality of these ancient effigy pipes are second to none anywhere in the world. Bowl that was used in some of the ceremonies, with a duck symbol carved on the side of it. Here we see carving being done in one of the pipes in one of the ancient ceremonial sites. And we see the typical circular Adena burial and ceremonial mounds. The conical and circular Adena burial mounds were particular to that culture. They were used as places of burial of great chiefs, as well as medicine people and women, and also used as ceremonial sites at certain times of the year. If you notice, the loincloth has a serpent design on it, on this Adena effigy pipe. Again, shows a connection to the feathered serpent cults of Mesoamerica. All the different elements and details of this pipe represent connections to the mound builder cultures and the ancient cultures of Mesoamerica. Now we enter a map showing the Ohio mound builder periods during the late Mississippian period, the great mound builder cultures of the Southeast and Midwest, so that you can see many of the sites, the Fort Ancient sites, Monongahela, sites of northern Ohio and Great Lakes area. Here we see many of the vegetables and seeds used and gathered. This is ceremonial tobacco, Nicotiana rustica, which was the sacred ceremonial tobacco grown in particular gardens and used in the sacred ceremonies. Very strong, very powerful. And we see here squash and gourds. The native peoples and their farming techniques, they had three main types of vegetables that they grew. They're called in Iroquoian language Deoheko, the three sisters. Corn, beans, and squash provided the staples of their lifestyle, their diet. Here we see a depiction of hunting, as well as the arrow points and arrowheads used. The shaman, who was connected with the animal kingdom, had the ability and the power to connect with the spirits of the animal species, especially the ones that were used for eating, for food. And they would do ceremonies and prayers with the sacred tobacco and the effigy pipes to call in the spirits of the animals and the animals themselves to increase the success of the hunters. And here we see examples of how animal bones were used for different tools in the Adena Hopewell culture. Various types of drills and awls. And here we see an example of a flint drill being used to start a fire. The village sites of this period were very, very extensive. As you can see, many of them were sometimes surrounded by a gate or stockade, sometimes for protection. Here we see the gathering of sacred corn, representing the goddess of the earth, the great corn mother. Here we see examples of mound builder pottery with the various types of engravings and patterns that were done on them. The whole lifestyle of the Adena, the Hopewell, and even the later Fort Ancient mound builder cultures was based on what we might call a shamanic lifestyle, living in balance. Here we see an example of what they call the Whittlesey cultural group in a village site, which was contemporaneous with the Fort Ancient mound builder culture. We see simpler pipes. We don't see quite the various types of artistic decoration that we saw in the earlier Adena and Hopewell cultures. Here we do see other examples of Whittlesey pottery, bone flutes. Different types of pottery with the symbols and stamps used on them. Here we see the cultural area where we find what they call the Whittlesey culture, Sandusky people, the Great Lakes region of northern Ohio up near Lake Erie. I see an engraved stone pipe. various types of beads, pottery again. And here we see a layout of the village of what they call the Monongahela people, who are scattered throughout parts of northern West Virginia, Pennsylvania, eastern Ohio. Again, contemporaneous with the Fort Ancient culture. And here we see the Great Serpent Mound, symbolizing the spirit power of the earth. Representing the great creative power of the universe and the Earth Mother. The serpent, or snake, was a very powerful symbol to these ancient peoples. Recent excavations done at Serpent Mound tend to show that this Great Serpent Mound may have been built by the Fort Ancient Indians a little over 1,000 years ago. Here we see Mississippian-style ornaments, perhaps a copper feather, copper human profile, and a human effigy pipe with face decorations representing face paint used in war ceremonies and shamanic ceremonies. And conch shell pendants. Here we see a rather large ceremonial flint blade, and a very good example of the engravings. For this one represents the Uktina, the great feathered serpent. And again, feathered serpent symbols of the Mississippian period that connect these symbols to Serpent Mound. An example of the intricate carving and patterns of shamanic symbolism used by the Mississippian culture. Examples of pottery and carvings used by the Mississippians. Here we see a map of some of the major Mississippian mound builder sites in eastern North America. Here we see an early picture of Serpent Mound closer to the turn of the century before it was restored. And excavations done within the past decade exploring the deeper aspects and meaning of the Serpent Mound. An aerial photo of the Great Serpent Mound. Here we see examples of Hopewell shamanism, the use of effigy rattles, the skull face mask of a Hopewell shaman, burial ceremonial pit, the use of the sacred flint or obsidian dagger. You see other medicine men and shamans around the medicine chief with various types of regalia, shamanic headdresses on. Otter, rabbit, many different types. Here we see copper effigy claws, sheets of mica and copper. Copper and mica were two elements that were very, very powerful and used in mound builder shamanism. You see many different types of copper artifacts here which connect with the ancient copper culture of Upper Michigan. Copper antlers, part of an ancient shamanic headdress. Again, copper ear spools and ornaments. A close-up of the death mask, which was partly made out of a human skull. And we see that this was found in this circular mound at the Hopewell site. Here we see other examples of effigy pipes from various states, Hopewell, Iroquoian culture, and Mississippian culture. Notice that many of these pipes are simple tubular pipes, not nearly as elaborate as the Adena Hopewell. And here we see a depiction of council ceremonies and shamanic ceremonies done within the Hopewell mound builder culture. The use of the symbolism of the sacred corn. The building and the lighting of the sacred fire, representing the life force of the Creator, the Great Spirit. And the entering of the great chief. And an example again of possibly a family burial site. And Hopewell figurines. Other examples of Hopewell pipes, tools and weapons. A drinking cup, other forms of pottery with bird figurines, headdress, copper bracelets, and here we see a map and artifacts of the Mississippian culture again. The Adena Hopewell mound builder culture were the ancestors in many ways of the later Mississippian. And all these cultures are the ancestors of the great peoples of the southeastern Indian nations, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Creek. Here we see examples of ceremonial and shamanic masks used in the animal spirit ceremonies. These masks from native cultures represent different spirit powers that the shamans, the medicine people, would come into contact with during their ceremonies. Some of these were animal spirits, some of them were spirits of the elements of nature, spirits from other realities. Each mask had a particular energy or power associated with it. Here we see a map of the ancient lands of the Cherokee Nation, the various types of towns, ceremonial areas. And here we see an example of a Cherokee village, a Mississippian culture village. And here we see examples again of the various types of carvings and engravings used by the Mississippian cultures. Many of them involving bird and serpent symbolism. An example of a medicine person. here we see examples also of pottery involving animal symbolism and various types of ceremonial blades. All of these symbols are part of the ancient mound builder culture of North America, Adena, Hopewell, Fort Ancient, and the later Mississippian, showing their spiritual connection to the earth and sky.